John here from Bethel Baptist Church in Whitchurch, Cardiff, and I'm also seconded to the South Wales Baptist Association. And part of that is to meet incredible people who remind me and who remind us that we are on mission. I've been having some great conversations with people from up and down the country about being on the mission of God, some of the joys, the breakthroughs, the excitements, the struggles, the challenges, the reality of life on mission. And it's been really encouraging, really challenging, really inspiring. And I really hope these conversations can challenge and encourage and inspire others as well. The first in this series is with an evangelist called Richard Gamble, who has felt called by God for the last 20 years to build a national monument, the Eternal Wall of Answered Prayer, filled with the testimonies of ordinary people's answered prayers to make hope visible in our nation. Really blessed by this conversation with Richard, and really hope it blesses and encourages you too. If you are not yet subscribed to our channel, please do think about that. It's one click away. Click on the notification bell to be just notified anytime new content is released, new conversations like this. Do join the conversation, do comment on it. If it's something you've enjoyed, like it and share it with others. Let's remind ourselves and each other that we're on mission. Well, Richard, it's just so great to have you with us. It's been great to connect with you over this, but thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
If you can sort of take us back, and I guess we're going back about sort of 20 years now, to the initial vision and an idea for this. Kind of how did you stumble across this vision?
Well, and it sounds a bit of an odd start, but I felt God told me to carry a cross around my county of Leicestershire. Took a bit of persuading of my elders in my church to let me do it. And I suppose I would describe that almost like a piece of performance art. I was dressed in a suit, carrying a cross as people went to work. And the intention was during Easter, I just wanted them to think about Jesus.
Yeah.
It started to get what I would say was like an unusual level of traction. And I started to hear of loads of different people who were having conversations about what they'd seen. And then one of them, my father, who's not a Christian, was in a governmental meeting, not even in Leicester. He works in Coventry, and this woman in the middle of the meeting said, "I saw the weirdest thing today. I saw a bloke dressed in a suit carrying a cross." And my dad then said, "Well, that was my son," and then proceeded to share the gospel with everybody. This is what my son believes. I mean, incredible. And I heard of people, I've since heard of people getting saved, just seeing the cross, didn't even speak to me. And so I'm praying and I'm saying, Lord, what do you want me to do next?
Yeah.
And as I was praying, that sort of vision, idea sort of flashed through my head to build a wall where every brick represents a story of answered prayer, a testimony to inspire people as they went past. So that was the essence of it. And I, went home, and my wife recognized the look in my face and she's like, "Oh, what's going on?" And I was like, I think we're going to build a national landmark, but I didn't really know what to do then. I'm not practical. My wife has banned me from DIY after setting fire to the bathroom, which is, quite some feat. Trying to save money, but didn't save money at all because we had a bathroom to decorate at the end of it. And I just didn't know the right steps. And really for 10 years, so this was 20 years ago when God spoke to me, for 10 years, sort of thinking about it. I do think it's really important to share the dream early on when God gives you a dream. So I did that very early on. There were a lot of raised eyebrows, it would be fair to say. And then you sort of talk to people and share your dream with them, and they go, "Well, that's nice." And you know they're thinking it's never going to happen. And then after 10 years of, not, I say, praying about it, it wasn't like I was praying every day. I was carrying on with life and all the challenges. But then after 10 years, I just came to this moment where I felt God say, right, you need to start working on this now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I met somebody, because I've been trying to find a Christian architect.
Mm.
And I'd met Christian architects, but they all thought I was off my rocker. And and then I met somebody and said, "Well, I think the first step is a Christian architect." And he said, "Oh, I know somebody."
Mm.
And all of a sudden, the doors were open, and we were able to get moving on the project.
That's amazing. I think there's a number of things there to pick up on, but I think sometimes when we sense that God is speaking, and there's that growing sense of vision. To be willing to wait on it, I think is really important because sometimes the initial thought grows and morphs and changes, and that's all part of the process, isn't it? And I've known people who've carried a dream or a vision for, like you said, decade, years and years and years, and that willingness to wait on it, to hold it's really important.
Yeah, but I mean that's a lovely spiritual way of describing it. I think the reality is I couldn't let it go.
Mm, mm, mm.
It just kept coming back.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so it was almost like a, because I meet loads of people who have a dream and then they talk about it, but they never actually make that first step.
Mm,
I think
mm.
I just don't know what to do with this, but I couldn't shake it. I could
Yeah,
not shake it until
yeah,
that point,
yeah,
like, bang, I've got to go now. I've got to
yeah,
be all.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I do think when you're following a dream of God, I do think there's the important step of speaking the dream,
Mm.
but the next step is like not waiting for provision, but just going for it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, you mentioned not being a sort of a practical person. I can identify with that 100%. In our first house, we kept putting up pictures to cover holes from pictures we were trying to hang up before that. So I totally
Yeah.
get that. So what were the kind of the first steps? You mentioned finding an architect.
Yeah. So I found an architect and he said, well, you know, the normal route is you have to find the land first because any architectural design is based upon the land. That was a learning for me. I mean, I am learning. I keep saying it's the first time I've ever built a national landmark, but I am learning as I go. And but that just didn't seem to be the right route. And then he said, well, why don't you run an architectural competition? The Royal Institute of British Architects do that. And then that was like, right, okay, I've got the path now. So we met with the RIBA. They were all up for it, which was really exciting. It cost money, which was less exciting. So and then at the same time, I heard about the concept of crowdfunding. And in those days, 20 years ago, not people weren't doing that particularly as much as they are now. And certainly I was not aware of it happening anywhere within Christian circles.
Yeah.
So I did a bit of research. I decided to set up a crowdfunder. And the way that you're supposed to do it is you work out what your target is, you set the target as half of that, and you go for it. And I was like, doesn't feel right to me. It's like either God's in this or he's not in this. So I'm just going to set the target for what the target is. But the way that it works is if you are a pound underneath that target, you don't get anything.
Right.
So we launched it on BBC Radio 2, which again is miraculous. How on earth we got on BBC Radio 2 to launch a Christian crowdfunding campaign for something that I didn't know what it was going to look like. I didn't know where it was going to be, and I didn't know when it when it would open. But by the grace of God, we were there,
Wow.
and I thought it was just going to take off, and it didn't.
Mm.
And so it was a 40-day campaign,
Mm.
and it was horrific. I can't, it was. I was massively stressed and under pressure. I
Mm.
was absolutely devastated that I'd gone on national radio to talk
Wow.
about God answered prayer, and I couldn't even get off the first step.
Mm. Mm.
That I'd embarrassed God,
Mm.
and just really grieved that I was shaming Him almost. And have I got this wrong? And so I did something that I've never done before, John. I just went and prayed through the night,
Mm.
and,
Mm.
and I went up onto a hill,
Mm.
prayed through the night, and I had an encounter with God. I can't explain it any other way. The whole sky just lit up for a millisecond. It was like pure white, and God just sort of downloaded loads of stuff to me in that millisecond. But the
Wow.
main theme of it was your job is to lead in peace.
Mm.
And at that point, we had 4 days to go. We were trying to raise £45,000, and we were
Mm.
£20,000 short.
Wow.
And
Wow.
nobody was answering any emails or picking up any phone calls. Everybody was sick to death of me. And
Mm.
so I definitely wasn't in peace. And so
Mm.
I had 2 days then wrestling with God to get to that point of peace. And
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
realized in that process was, this is God's project, not mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is. And if I try and strive and push, it's not going to happen. So I got to that place of peace where I was like, well, okay, if this is your project, God, you got to do something now, because I'm all done. And I hit that point of peace with 2 days to go, and then all the money came in one day.
Wow.
I mean, it was just so we hit the target with a day to spare.
Wow.
Claire Baldwin's producer phoned up straight away saying, Claire's been watching this every day. She can't believe that you've just got over the line.
Wow. Wow.
And people phoning me up going, mate, I can't concentrate on my work. I keep looking at the dial going up on it. It was an amazing
Wow.
moment. And for me, that was such a, if I'd have got this wrong, if I'd have messed up, that was the moment that my loving Father could have bailed me out, and we'd have not hit the target, you know. But actually, He did the opposite, and He's blessed the work, and that then almost puts a flag into the sand where you go, okay, well, God's in this. God's in this. Let's go.
Mm. And that sense of being willing to say, Lord, if you're speaking, then this is going to have to be you. It kind of positions us differently as leaders, doesn't it, in stuff? Because so often, and I'm aware of my own life, my own ministry, we seem to set our sort of vision for something on the resources that we've got. We kind of think,
Yeah.
we kind of think, can I imagine this is doable? Therefore, it's wise to kind of go on. But to be willing to wrestle for peace in a season where the money's not there, the time's running out, that's incredible, Richard.
Well, the thing that I have learned over the last decade is that word wasn't just for that moment. That's a
Mm.
word that I have to continually go back to.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've started to, because obviously we're talking about some big stuff and it's high pressure.
Mm.
And I've learned to notice when I'm not at peace,
Mm.
and then
Mm.
and then actually go, right, okay, come on, why are you not at peace? And then recalibrate.
Mm.
Part
Mm.
of that recalibration is remembering all the different stories of God's favor that have got us here.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
recalibrate my mind. Okay, God's in this,
Mm.
and then it's like the next stage is right. God's in this. Next stage is God's in charge. It's His project, not mine.
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and sort of try and strip away those areas where I've maybe, sort of erred into striving.
Mm, mm. That word recalibration is really helpful because it's yeah, the amount of times you shouldn't have to remind yourself, but we do have to remind ourselves this is God's thing.
Yeah, I always think of Elijah, when he's had this amazing miracle, hasn't he? And of calling the fire down on the wood. I love the fact that he pours water on it because I believe effectively what he's saying is impossible has no gradients. Either God is in this or he's not.
Yeah.
And so, but the challenge for us is when the facts start stacking up,
Mm.
then that's where the pressure can come. And for Elijah, then a few days later, he's had enough, hasn't he?
Yeah.
He's
Yeah. Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I'm ready to bin this off. And I think for me, the recalibration is essential. But that point of impossible has no gradients. Nothing's
Mm.
changed. And
Mm.
I've been constantly, and us as a team, faced with impossible situations,
Mm.
constantly
Mm.
faced with experts going, it can't be done.
Yeah.
And then you
Yeah.
go, great, because if it can't be done, then when it is done, it's for the glory of God. And that's our. But I'm saying that in a nice little twee sort of phrase. But there's probably weeks of pain for me to get to that point and recalibrate my
Yeah.
mind. To be honest with
Yeah.
you, but
Yeah.
the story, which I say to our team as well, the story has to be on the opening day, which is the start line for the vision and the ministry, not the end.
Mm. Mm.
But on the opening day, it can't be. It's been really stressful. We've nearly killed ourselves getting here. That
Yeah.
can't be the story.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
has to
Yeah.
be. It was way above us. We were overwhelmed most of the time, but
Mm.
we chose to believe.
Yes. Yeah. 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 That's incredible. And that in itself is a testimony, isn't it? Because I know testimonies are going to be a big part of this thing. So a big part of the vision, as I've understood it, Richard, is to make hope visible. So to have a national monument. Do you want to tell us a little bit about where it's going to sit and where it's going to be?
Yeah, sure. So we're building this monument in between the M6 and the M42 and HS2 and next to Birmingham Airport.
Mm.
So it's highly, highly visible, and I believe one of the most visible places uh, in the United Kingdom.
Mm.
We've estimated about 800,000 people will see it every week and go by it, and that's part of the vision in terms of the physicality of it. But there's another part which is way bigger, which is if you look at the track records of national landmarks, they get incredible coverage. So the Angel of the North that we'll be familiar with in this country, the image of the Angel of the North gets seen by 51,000 people per minute.
Mm.
I mean, that's a massive number. So if you
Mm.
start looking out for it, you'll see how often it appears on adverts, it appears
Mm.
in the trailers for Mock the Week. It's even in your
Yes.
passport, you know?
Wow. Wow.
And and so what we want to do is create an iconic image that people go, what's that about? So it's not
Yes.
obvious. It hasn't got a cross on that people go, well, I know what that's about, and they go away. Christ the Redeemer in Rio de Janeiro gets 30 million Googles per year.
Wow.
30
Wow.
million Googles from all over the world.
Wow.
Imagine loads of kids doing their school project on landmarks. My son did one a few years ago, and they had to do projects on landmarks, and he put the wall in it, which I thought was really sweet of him. But uh, but when they Google Christ the Redeemer, they don't find anything about Jesus.
Mm.
Unbelievably, the narrative is around the French guy who built it. It's
Mm.
around a sign to show how welcoming Brazil is to the world.
Right.
But the message of Jesus, which was the original intention, has been lost.
mm,
When
mm,
people Google Eternal Wall, they will find a database of 1 million stories of answered prayer. Now, if
yeah,
you just imagine coming into finding a database of all these stories that you can search through, what are you going to do? I think you're going to do one or two things. You're going to search whatever storm of life that you're currently going through.
mm, mm,
So if they type in ankylosing spondylitis, if they can, if they know how to spell it, but if they type that in, they will find a story of somebody who who was diagnosed with a life-changing, incurable disease, who was healed,
mm.
and that was me. That's my story.
Wow.
But they
Wow.
won't find one of those. They'll probably find thousands.
Yeah, yeah,
If they Google on loneliness or debt or addiction
yeah,
or slavery, they're going to find loads of stories or
yeah,
barrenness.
yeah.
And that is the way that will make hope visible. I
Mm,
think the other
mm,
thing that they will do is they will say, hey, has God answered any prayers in Newport?
mm,
Has God
mm,
answered any prayers in Swansea?
mm,
And or Pontypridd or wherever it is, they'll type that in, and then they'll be able to see stories of people not only in their current day but in history who've
yes.
been in their locality, who've called on the God who answers, and see what's happened. And
Yeah,
then we hope, of course, to link them in their spiritual journey to churches in that locality that can take them on their spiritual journey. And that way we can tell not only the United Kingdom, but we can tell the world that Jesus is still alive, that he
yeah, yeah,
listens, and he answers
yeah,
prayer,
yeah.
because the mainstream media are not covering for us.
No,
The church is being put on mute. Even social media, I'm hearing of churches being sandboxed or quarantined by social media for sharing
mm,
miraculous news, and they're posted as it being fake news. And there's a
mm,
reason for that. And the reason is spiritual and really clear.
mm.
Revelation 12:11 says, they overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the word of the testimony.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
enemy is stuffed on the blood of the Lamb. It's a done deal,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
That ain't ever going to change.
yeah, yeah.
But there is a strategy to put the church on mute,
Mm,
and
mm,
it's multi-layered,
mm.
and it's caused by culture, it's caused by finance. There's loads of different strategies, and I believe God has spoken this vision for us in this country to break out of that
Yes.
and actually proclaim the deeds of the Lord.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
When we did our public consultation, I had a lady come up to me from the church, from the local church, and she said, well, I know God answers prayer, but why do you have to brag about it? And I was like, and I just sort of politely smiled, but inside I'm thinking, well, mainly because there's over 200 scriptures that
Mm,
talk about proclaiming the deeds of the Lord. There's 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 a whole weight of scripture that talk about the importance of remembering what he has done.
yes,
Deuteronomy
yes,
4 verse 9 says, talks about don't let what your eye has seen, fade from your heart or your memory. Make sure you pass it on to your children and your children's children.
yes,
Now we are talking about building a landmark, and I say that the work begins as soon as it's built, but it's going to stand for centuries.
mm, mm, mm.
Now we don't know what world what the world is going to look like. I wouldn't have imagined 30 years ago that some of the things that we're discussing and debating right now, humanity would be even considering. But there we are. So who
Mm.
knows what it's going to look like in 100 years' time? But what I can tell you it's going to look like is that there will be a 50-meter monument, a giant white infinity loop of 1 million stories, and hopefully more than 1 million stories, that will
Yeah,
point unashamedly unapologetically to Christ, to the God who answered. And that's the
Yeah.
vision.
That's amazing. I love that so much. I was thinking as you were talking there about the importance of testimony and how sometimes when we think of testimony, we can often think of our journey to faith. So our saving testimony, salvation story, and those things
Yes.
are right and important that we share. But I think what we do very little of is tell people from outside the church just what life is like with Jesus.
Yeah.
And what it's like now to know, as you said, you've used the phrase a few times, the God who answers,
Yes.
and to
Yeah.
be unashamed of those stories as well.
Yeah. And we're not, listen, I'm not in any way promoting a supermarket God that we go there with our shopping list. I think
Mm,
that will be the biggest surprise as people come and visit this piece of public art. That
mm.
actually the thread that will go through all the stories is about the importance of relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, yeah,
Not all the stories will be, yes, wow, I prayed it amazingly, it happened, because the
yeah,
reality is that's not my experience. And as I read through the Word of God, that's not the experience in the Word of God either.
yeah,
And by
yeah.
the way, all the answered prayers in the Bible will be in this as well. So,
Mm.
uh, but it is important that we do remember the things that God has done, and we have I think, a bit of a throwaway culture where we pray, God answers. Sometimes we even forget that we prayed about the thing that He's answered.
Yeah, yeah,
Which is why I've got a great respect for those people who journal and capture it all.
yeah.
Speaking to somebody the other day, he went, "Yeah, well, went onto his app. Yeah, I've got 153 answers to prayers. That's fantastic."
Well,
And 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 we have this throwaway culture where we don't actually remember or record what God has done in our
yeah,
life.
yeah.
And it's almost a bit disdainful, a bit disrespectful because of
Mm.
the busyness of the world that we live in. And I've been quite surprised talking to prayer networks how few of them actually know what prayers have been answered in their network.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And if we have had so many instances of God moving on this project and answering our prayers. And somebody said to me a couple of years ago, because I've never known a project like this. It is just incredible how God's hand is moving on it. I believe one of the reasons for that is we steward them well. We
Mm,
steward well when God answers a prayer,
mm,
because
mm.
it's in Corinthians that Paul talks about the gracious favor granted, the answer prayers of many.
Mm.
I think it's is it 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, it might be. But when you look at that phrase, the gracious favor granted, the phrase is actually charismata, which is
Mm,
fascinating.
mm, mm.
And so I sort of went on a journey like, okay, well, if when God answers a prayer, it's a spiritual gift. I don't mean in the same way that the spiritual gifts are described in the Word of God. I'm not elevating it to that, but clearly, when God does something, it has His DNA on it.
Yeah,
It has His fingerprint on it.
yeah,
We can't carelessly throw that away.
yeah,
We can't. In Psalm 145, it talks about meditating on the deeds of the Lord.
yes.
So when God answers a prayer, it's not just about, wow, that's amazing, Father, you've answered that prayer.
Yeah.
I think there's also a real importance to spend some time meditating on it and go, what are you showing me?
Mm,
Because
mm, mm,
I believe God is way, way, way more interested on our journey
mm, mm,
towards that answered prayer and our journey after it than the actual answered prayer itself.
mm.
And so one of the products of what we're doing, I think, or the consequences of what we're doing is, as we're going around all different churches and talking about answered prayer, it's making people think, has God answered prayer for me?
Mm, mm.
I sat with a lady and she went, God's never answered a prayer for me. And I was like, oh, okay. And I said, well, tell me about some times that you prayed. And then she told me about some times she prayed. I went, what happened? And she went through it, and her little face lit up, and she's like, oh, yeah, God answered, didn't he? And I went, yeah. Now, if we can do that for a nation,
Yes.
if we can heighten levels of faith in our nation that God listens and he answers,
Yeah.
and then if we can then encourage people to not only reflect on it and be stirred by it, but actually share that story,
Mm.
knowing and understanding the power of testimony in Revelation 12:11 that helps us overcome, I think we've got a game-changing moment for the United Kingdom.
Yeah. That, like you're saying, the opportunity for faith to grow and build. I'm old enough to remember singing that song, Count Your Blessings, name them one by one.
Yeah,
But that line in it, and it'll surprise you what the Lord has done. And you think, yeah, we
very
can be
good.
so careless. We're so careless there with what God has
Yeah,
done. So it's reckless, isn't it? Not to remember. So it's so
yeah,
reckless. Yeah,
yeah.
love that. And so, Richard, if people are listening and they've got stories, and perhaps even as they're listening, they've been reminded of stuff that God has
Let's
done,
hope so.
how could they get involved in this?
So, what I would say before I tell you that bit, let me just tell you a little bit about the way that the Mobius strip, this infinity loop, is made up of 94 segments. Segment 1 to 71 represents different regions of the United Kingdom. 71 up to 93 represents the rest of the world. And then segment 94, which is the top of the arch, will represent the persecuted church. Now the purpose of that is that somebody who comes physically or digitally will be able to search by location. In other words, for every person who's listening, the place where you live, and we've worked it out, we've done the maths, we know how many answered prayers we need as a minimum from every town, city, and village and hamlet in the United Kingdom.
Well,
and so we know how many answered prayers we need from where you live. And the Nehemiah principle, of course, is they built where they lived.
Yeah.
Now we can raise the money, which we still need to do. We've raised 72%, but we're in good shape. But the thing that we absolutely cannot do is create the stories of answered prayer.
Yeah.
So there's a responsibility, I believe, hopefully that's taken up from everyone listening. Is like, we need your story to reach the place where you live. And so what we're asking people to do is to go to eternalwall.org.uk, and you can share with us written stories, video stories, audio stories. Now, what I would encourage your listeners to do is don't just give us the one that, comes straight to your mind. Okay? So the one that comes straight to my mind is ankylosing spondylitis. Right? And that's the big wow. And I've shared that. However, if that's all I share, I'm not really representing the God who answers in my life. Because also God has taught me patience. God has supported me in suffering of loss of a loved one. So I would encourage you, try and do 10. Try and commit to sharing with us 10 stories. It will massively encourage you, because you'll see God's hand in your life. But what it will also do is provide a range of those stories.
Yes.
And here's the beauty. In 100 years' time, somebody in the world, maybe they're on the site, or maybe they're just Googling it, or whatever technology is there in 100 years' time,
Yeah.
walking around the 3D visualization or something. But in 100 years' time, somebody is going to read the story that you put in. And even though you've left the planet, you are continuing to share your testimony and leading people to the God who answers.
Yeah. It's stunning. Absolutely stunning. It kind of, as you're talking, just resonates with that sort of journey of the Israelites, through wilderness and into Promised Land, a journey that's sort of scattered with these altars where they stopped and paused and went, God did that. And you can
Yeah,
go and look and see the altar where we celebrated that. Love that.
yeah,
Love that so much.
yes. So many points like that, aren't there? And the interestingly for me on that, on a maybe controversial theological point, but when they crossed the Jordan, then it took the 12 stones and they put them in Gilgal. There is reference to that monument 300 years later in Judges.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some, I say it's controversial because some theologians don't believe it's the same thing. And I've got to do a bit more digging to find out why they believe that. But it had a significant part in the story with Ehud, and he turned around at that point. And there's something exciting about the physicality that is there for generations to see ongoing. So, yeah, that's a very, very long answer to your initial question of how do we make hope visible. But as you can see, it's quite a complex and detailed picture. But just so your listeners are aware, this is not like a pipe dream. We are on course to start building in March. We've already built the access road. We have our planning permission. We have the land. We've got 72% of our funding. That is enough for us to sign contracts and get started. And the projected opening date is June 2027.
Wow. And even as you're just rattling off some of that, I know that the land is an answer to prayer, the road. I mean, there's so many answers to prayer just in that story to this point. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I know we haven't got much time, but I'd love people to look at the story of the heavenly land, which is on YouTube, and we'll send you the link to that, because that's just such a gobsmacking story of how God connected two people that he'd spoken to about this vision, and developed into us being given a piece of land worth £1.7 million. I mean, incredible.
Absolutely. I mean, incredible doesn't cover it, really. That's just stunning. The time has just raced by, Richard. So it's been so good to talk to you. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the opportunity, and hopefully we'll speak again. And at the very least, you need to do a little live podcast when we're opening in 2027.
I'll take you up on that. I will definitely take you up on that. I would love to. Absolutely love to.
Fantastic. Thank you.